Welcome everyone. Welcome to Dharma Conversations, and good to have you back with us again. We concluded the mega series on the destruction of history by Marxists with Sandeep Balakrishna, and we received some overwhelming support and good feedback on that. So, in the same vein, we shall now again delve into, or rather, pick on Sandeep's passion for history and get him to unravel and talk about the history of the Congress Party itself. And to my mind, it is very topical to do it right now, given that we completed phase 5 of the general elections, the current general elections. And the reason for doing this in my conversation with Sandeep is that there is no authentic version, no authentic record, no authentic chronicle of how the Congress formed, evolved, or devolved over the years. So I think this is another piece of information that needs to come out in the public domain. And who better to do it than with Sandeep Balakrishna? So let's start this series on the history of Congress Party itself with the eminent historian Sandeep Balakrishna. So thank you all. Thank you for your continued support. And we shall start the first episode with Sandeep with this conversation. Hi Sandeep. So thank you for joining us again to continue these conversations, Dharma conversations. And I think it's topical, like I mentioned, to delve into the history of the Congress Party itself. So it's topical. We've completed phase 5 of the current general elections. From what it was as the principal pole or the only pole of the Indian polity during and post-independence to its crashing defeat in 2014 and further decimation across states, yet the tall claims being made that they're the ones who represent India truly, they're the ones who got India's freedom struggle. And of course, the eternal clown prince continues to masquerade as the legacy of a large freedom fighting family. How authentic is that? And how true are these claims? How did Congress Party start by itself? Can we start with that and then we'll get into more details?
Yeah, sure, Parag. One of I don't know, how to contextualize this, in a nutshell. But one of the truths hiding in plain sight is the fact that there is no objective, both objective and authentic, history of the Congress Party itself. Congress as an organization. Congress in all its incarnations, all right? There is simply no one comprehensive, objective work that deals with the history of this organization, all right? The only official history of the Congress Party that exists is written by a congressman himself. His name is Pattabhi Sitaramayya.
Okay.
Now, he was one of Gandhi's favorite disciples. But we'll get to that. I mean, let's not get ahead of ourselves. So, this is the truth. This is a flaw, a lacuna, hiding in plain sight. So, obviously, over the course of this series of podcasts dedicated to exploring the history of the Congress Party, it can only be, we can't touch to the very depths, but at most we can look at it as in a capsule fashion, if you will, without omitting crucial details. All right. So with that, I think we can begin this podcast series.
So this gentleman who authored the only chronicle, and it obviously doesn't qualify to be authentic, but it was written by Congressman himself. When was this written?
This was written sometime in the 40s or after India got independence. I don't recall the exact year.
Okay.
I'll mention it maybe in the next, when we are doing the captions, we'll put it there. When this work was written. Right. So, if I have to put the entire history of the Congress Party in one line, it is this. The Congress was a party, the Congress was an organization that was started by a Scotsman, which is today controlled by an Italian who took Indian citizenship. In that sense, the full life of the Congress has come a full circle. This is a one-line history of the Congress.
Started by a Scotsman.
Scotsman. All right. Now, there is a beautiful, very profound verse in the Kathopanishad, which basically says that Sasyam iva martya pachyate sasyam iva jayate punaha, meaning they rot like vegetation and will be born again like vegetables. Now, the history of the Congress party is not just the history of one political party or one political organization. It is a history of multiple partitions or mutilations of the same body. So when we say the history of the Congress party, we must ask ourselves one question: which Congress? And this history of the Congress party can broadly be divided into 5 or 6 broad phases, given that next year next year marks the 140th anniversary of what they call as Congress. All right, I think, like you said, it is both timely and topical. All right. Now, I am primarily a student of Indian civilization and Indian history, and I think, to my mind, this perspective gives us perhaps the best clarity in both analyzing and grasping small, large, important, unimportant, significant, insignificant issues. And so the story of the Congress party begins, it begins with the first time that Bharatavarsha lost her independence and began a long struggle, centuries of prolonged struggle to recover this lost freedom. And so, the history of this freedom struggle of India, it comprises 3 distinct epochs. Epoch number 1 was the, prolonged, protracted, nationwide resistance, against tyrannical Muslim regimes that lasted for nearly 800 years. The second phase was the fight against the British colonial rule. And the third, against the combined vestiges of both these previous imperialisms. And this third phase came in the form of the Nehruvian dynastic regime. So these are the 3 broad phases. If you look at the history of the Congress party and trace it back to the recovery of India's civilizational freedom.
So Sandeep,
this is a picture we get.
Yes, Sandeep. So the first epoch, which is the 800-year-old fight back against Islamic invaders, would you attribute that to the history of Congress, or would you say it came post?
What I'm saying is, this is the approach you should have.
Okay.
To analyze these things from a civilizational perspective. That's what I mentioned.
Okay, that's where the civilization angle comes in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these 3 phases. Phase number 1 is against the extended, elongated, protracted Muslim regimes. The second is the British colonialism of India, and the third is the vestiges of a different, an imperialism of a different kind, which combined the vestiges of both the British and the Islamic imperialism. Clear?
Clear.
Right. So, and this last imperialism came in the form of the Nehruvian dynastic regime, which lasted continuously for 55 years. All right. And this last imperialism, the Nehruvian imperialism, was perhaps the deadliest of all of them. Nehru recast Sharia as secularism, and he recast the British colonial exploitation of India as socialism, and he inflicted the worst of both these oppressions on an entire country that naively trusted him.
Well said, and very, very telling and apt.
Okay. So this is the kind of backdrop we should have. And with that, we can, get into our, the first episode proper. So you can begin anywhere, but we can begin, I think a proper place is after Indians lost the first war of Indian independence, what is incorrectly known as Sepoy Mutiny or Indian Mutiny Rebellion, whatever, in 1857. Now, this mutiny, the Sepoy Mutiny or the first war of independence, perhaps, the manner in which the British suppressed it, I mean, there is simply no parallel to their savagery. Even savages pale in comparison to the ruthlessness, sheer brutality, of how the British suppressed it. But its aftermath, I mean, that was the first war of Indian independence was essentially to expel the British East India Company. The British Crown, England, the government of England was not directly, controlling India. The East India Company was. Okay, it is basically an MNC.
MNC, correct.
Basically an MNC of bandits and savages of the, worst sort. That's pretty much it. Now, in the aftermath, after that First War of Independence was put down, you must look at all the parliamentary debates in England at that time. You must look at those parliamentary debates. They are very, very, very eye-opening, and it is an admittance. British people themselves, officials coming from various ranks, they themselves admit the kind of excesses, even that is a mild word, that the East India Company, its officials, its bureaucrats perpetrated against Indians. All right? All the severe economic exploitation, over-taxation, I mean, we can do a separate thing on that. But anyway, so that is when the British Crown took control of India. They started ruling India directly on behalf of the Crown. So this is pretty much it. But what that First War of Indian independence taught them was several valuable lessons. That the East India Company had pushed the Indians so far down, that it exceeded all bounds of tolerance. That this kind of what they call as revolt happened. So how to do this? So they came to a conclusion. They came to a decision which basically said that a safety valve has to be found so that we will continue to bleed India.
But without pushing them to the brink.
Without pushing Indians to the brink. So remember, neither the British Crown, forget East India Company, forget all their governors, governor generals, all their officials. The British Crown till date has not apologized. So in their eyes, East India Company just pushed the boundary too far. In their eyes, the colonization of India was not wrong.
Was a alleged moral right?
Yeah, it was the moral right of this, superiority of the white skin and, white man's burden, this kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
Theories were invented. Anyway, so there is no remorse, there is no apology. So find a safety valve. So to prevent this kind of thing from happening. So fast forward a few decades, a guy called Alan Octavian Hume, he founded something called the Indian National Congress.
What was his motivation? I mean, why would a white skin form a party which begins with the word Indian?
I'll tell you. Okay. So he founded this organization called Indian National Congress ostensibly to bring reform.
So the ostentatious reason you said was to reform, bring about reform in India.
Yeah.
And
so that is how it was couched.
Okay.
But there is a backstory to it. What happened, after the British, British Crown took over India in 1858, Queen Victoria. Okay, at that time, the British intelligence, the government bureaucracy, all that apparatus, it began to keep a close watch for what it called subversive activities. In order so that if at all there are stirrings or indications of a similar revolt to that of 1851 occurred. So they kept a hawk-like watch on what they called as subversive activities. And one of the people was a retired ICS officer known as Alan Octavian Hume or AO Hume.
See, he was an officer of the...
He was a retired ICS officer.
Okay.
Indian Civil Service.
Okay.
Retired ICS officer. So he kept a tight watch on all such, what they call subversive activities.
Okay.
And what he learned over the years scared the wits out of him. By 1878 or 1879, AO Hume received intelligence from various parts of India that Swamis, Sannyasis, monks and religious devotees held in the highest veneration by the people, who had support among the masses of the lowest strata of population, were determined to do something, and that something meant violence. Close quote.
Oh.
Okay, a little known story of the events that led up to the First War of Indian Independence is what the British call a Sannyasi rebellion.
So sannyasis did rebel.
Sannyasis, monks, fakirs, all of them, they had formed quasi armies, and they, gave the, put the fear of the devil in the among the well-organized, well-disciplined British army itself, throughout Bengal, parts of Bihar, that belt. And they were suppressed with extraordinary cruelty. We will do a separate series on this.
Yeah, strangely, I'm sure you tracked what has happened in West Bengal in the last 48 hours.
Yeah, there you go.
Seems to be...
Yeah, it seems to be. History repeats, sir.
History repeats.
History repeats.
And this time at the hand of an elected...
forget that.
I know.
Yeah,
the point is, it's an eerie coincidence.
It's not a coincidence at all. These people, because you mentioned this, I'll finish off the topic in passing quickly. The ruling class that succeeded British inherited the worst of their imperialist tendencies.
Okay.
As simple as that.
So those are on display.
Sir, where have all these fellows, all these so-called regional parties, where have they inherited from whom have they inherited their mentality? The mothership, Congress Party. And who did the Congress Party inherit these imperialist oppressive tendencies?
Okay,
British.
The chain is very clearly...
Yeah, it's very clear. This is why, we have to read history. So anyway, this sannyasi, so-called sannyasi rebellion, sannyasi andolan, whatever. So we'll do a separate podcast on that. So that really scared the British. So when AO Hume saw the intelligence reports that, a repeat of the same sannyasi rebellion was taking place, was brewing by about 1878 or 1879, he decided to do something. Because remember that the people of India, they gave these sannyasis their unconditional support. This is the real strength of India. It has always been that. It still is. To what extent, we don't know anyway. And when AO Hume, ordered to have all this intelligence compiled, it ran into 7 full volumes.
7 full volumes of intelligence reports.
Of intelligence reports, news reports from British spies and other agencies. And this is a gist of what was planned by these sannyasis. Quote, the news referred to the secretion of old swords, spears and matchlocks, which would be ready when required. What was predicted was a sudden violent outbreak of sporadic crimes, murders of obnoxious persons, robbery of bankers, looting of bazaars. In the existing state of the lowest half-starving classes, the first few crimes would be the signal for hundreds of similar ones. And after the bands had obtained formidable proportions, the educated classes, bitter against the government, would join the movement. They would assume the lead, give the outbreak cohesion and direct it as a national revolt. Close quote. In other words, a repeat of 1857 was planned. Except that this time, like I said, the British had already learned several valuable lessons, and as a result of which they strategized better. They had been more careful and better prepared. And remember 1878, when this guy got these 7 volumes of news reports, 25 years had already passed from 1857. So which means this time if a revolt happened, it would be on a scale and with a preparation which would be almost fail-proof.
Fail-proof.
Right?
And difficult for them to
And
curtail.
had this second war of independence erupted, the course of Indian history would have been permanently altered. And when AO Hume, thought about this, we have to marvel at his foresight. We really have to
Absolutely,
appreciate it.
absolutely.
We have to appreciate
Yeah,
it.
exactly the same thought.
And what he did was that he borrowed directly from the worst of the biblical traditions, which means it is a tradition which missionaries continue to use. Speaking the language of love. Speaking in a honeyed tongue, but concealing their real intention.
Intent.
Okay? And AO Hume's, what he did, using this tactic of deceit, it is also an expression of something called a white man's burden. I'll come to that. After, he retired as ICS officer, overnight, he transformed himself as a friend and a well-wisher of Indians. But this time, he chose his audience very, very, very carefully. On 1st March 1883, he wrote an open letter. He addressed it to the graduates of the Calcutta University. By the way, the University of Calcutta was founded in 1857.
At the same time as the first war.
So Hume addressed an open letter to the graduates of the Calcutta University. Okay, so 1857 when it was founded, from then till 1883, which is when Hume wrote his letter, you would have had what? University, matlab say 3 or 5 year course. Let's say keep it at 3 years. So about 26, 27 years had passed. So how many graduates?
That is the size of the
nine
university.
batches. 9 batches of graduates.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he wrote this open letter to the graduates of Calcutta University, and he disguised it as an appeal. What was his appeal? It was an appeal for establishing an association for the, quote, mental, moral, social and political regeneration of the people of India. Classic, subterfuge tactic.
Yeah. Very clever.
It was in reality, it was a passionate, moving and heartfelt letter, and it obviously elicited the designed response. Something called the Indian National Union was formed as a result of that appeal.
So sorry, first what was founded as Indian National Union, or straight away called Indian
Something called the Indian National Union.
National? Okay.
The target audience of this union was the deracinated class of primarily of Bengali Hindus whose brains by now had been completely blow-dried by Macaulay education. 1836 Macaulay Minutes, 1857 Calcutta University. By that time, lots of these educational institutions modeled on British lines had already been established. So you had about 1.5 generations of deracinated Bengali Hindus. So this was AO Hume's target audience. Okay. On the other side, when he, even as he formed this Indian National Union, on a parallel track, Hume was also carrying on a correspondence with the Viceroy of India. Back then it was Dufresne. And this is, I will read out a small but telling excerpt from that letter. Quote, Hume writes this: a safety valve for the escape of great and growing forces generated by our own action was urgently needed, and no more efficacious safety valve than our Congress movement could possibly be devised.
So hold on. So this is brilliant. So that is how this was. So it was basically he was a regent planted by the empire to portray himself as a well-wisher and control the outpouring.
Yeah. Basically to, like I said, safety valve, no?
Yeah, I get it. What I'm saying is, so this has remained hidden.
It is
AO Hume
hidden.
is known.
Okay. Now, let me pause here. Okay. This is what he writes. AO Hume, in a letter to Lord Dufferin, Viceroy. What does the official history of the Congress party say about the founding of the Congress? Pattabhi Sitaramayya. This is what he writes about the origins, about the founding of the Congress party. Quote, it is shrouded in mystery as to who originated the idea of an all India Congress.
It's shrouded in mystery.
Apart from the Great Darbar of 1877 or the International Exhibition in Calcutta, which are supposed to have furnished the model, the idea was conceived in a private meeting of 17 men after the Theosophical Convention held at Madras in December 1884. Whatever the origin, we come to the conclusion that the idea was in the air, that the need of such an organization was being felt, that Mr. Alan Octavian Hume took the initiative. Close quote. Are you telling me that this man who wrote the official history of the Congress party
He does not know the
does
origins.
not know this? When he's taken such scrupulous care to compile such a fat volume, he was a near contemporary. Okay? So what is the picture we get? Basically, of the official history of the Congress party, what is the picture we get? The picture we get is that the history of the Indian freedom movement is nothing but the history of the Congress party. Right?
That's been
This is the big lie.
big lie.
Okay? But even in this alleged history, there is a three-tiered hierarchy in this alleged history. The first is a pre-Gandhian phase, which is paid a crafty lip service, lip service. The second tier comprises the so-called Gandhian period, which becomes tricky. It becomes tricky and important because no matter how difficult it is to separate, Nehru's fortunes are inextricably and proportionately linked with Gandhi's blunders. The third tier is the non-stop vacations that Nawab Nehru took to Europe and all exotic locations, even as the freedom struggle was raging within India. This is a point I will elaborate in great detail in the future episodes. All right. Now, this is how the official history of the Congress party, right in its inception itself, there is deception. Okay. And what R.C. Majumdar, thanks to this great man, this great truth teller, he immediately punctures Pattabhi Sitaramayya's, lie that he doesn't know, nobody knows the origins of the founding of the Congress party. This is what, R.C. Majumdar writes. The Congress was a culmination of the evolution of political ideas and organizations from a recent past. There was no sudden emergence of this political institution, and there was nothing new or novel either in its ideas or methods. Pattabhi Sitaramayya's statement is very misleading. Neither the Delhi Darbar of 1877 nor the International Exhibition had anything to do with the Congress. The first suggested the idea of the National Conference, not the Congress.
Not the Congress.
No. There is nothing to support the view that the idea of the Congress was conceived by 17 members of the Theosophical Convention, except a vague statement of Mrs. Annie Besant, which contains glaring errors. Nor is the official historian of the Congress right in his view that the idea was in the air. Close quote. It takes perversion and cowardice of the highest order to, fudge or fake the origins of your own party about which you're, so proud of. All right?
Yeah.
Now let's come back to Mr. AO Hume and his safety valve letter. Okay? Now, the other impact of AO Hume's safety valve, scheme was that it effectively but temporarily halted the great flood of the tremendous philosophical, spiritual, intellectual, social, political and patriotic forces that were over the previous half century, which were shaping up to become what I previously referred to as the new Indian Renaissance or the modern Indian Renaissance. I spoke about this in the previous episodes, in the previous series. And one of the brightest minds of this movement was a man named Surendranath Banerjee. He was highly respected, admired, and he was feared even in England. He used to visit England quite often on various errands. And there, a veteran and a very, very respected journalist and editor, William Thomas Stead, W.T. Stead. When he met Surendranath Banerjee, he was so taken in by him, so in awe of him, that he made a pun on Surendranath Banerjee's name as Surrender Not Banerjee.
Oh, nice.
Surrender Not Banerjee. Okay. And whom did AO Hume's new Indian National Congress, whom did it elect as its first president? Not Surendranath Banerjee, but a hardcore Macaulay Putra, W.C. Banerjee. He spelled his name as Banerjee. Bonnerjee. Banerjee. Okay. This W.C. Banerjee was so ashamed of his original name. Okay. Umesh Chandra Banerjee.
That was his original name.
So he shortened it as W.C. Banerjee. And this is how R.C. Majumdar describes W.C. Banerjee. Quote, the selection of W.C. Banerjee as president gives a fair idea of the political outlook of the founders of the Congress. Mr. Banerjee lived the life of an Englishman and not only kept aloof from, but ridiculed all sorts of political and nationalist agitation. Close quote. Okay. But it is also a fact that the same W.C. Banerjee, he later defended Surendranath Banerjee in court in a contempt case, but our assessment should stand on conviction, on ethics, on justice, on spiritual principles above all. The right thing that W.C. Banerjee should have done was to refuse the presidentship that was offered to him, presidentship of the INC, that was offered to him, and offer it instead to Surendranath Banerjee, who was a more deserving candidate. But later in life, and quite fitting to his, befitting his deracinated character, W.C. Banerjee decided that India was not the right country for him. So he migrated to England, and there he contested on a Liberal Party ticket in 1892, and he lost it. He lost the election. More importantly, why was Surendranath Banerjee kept out of the founding of the Indian National Congress? Answer: because according to AO Hume, he was branded as an extremist. And this gives a great clue into the history of the, or rather trajectory of the Congress party which followed. essentially, what is clear from the founding of the Congress Party is that the Congress as an organization was founded by the very people, the very British who colonized us. All right? Now, how it morphed into an organization that fought for India's freedom struggle, we will look at that story in some detail in the coming episodes. Okay? So, this marks the founding of the Congress Party by AO Hume in 1885. It marks what can be called as the first phase in the history of the Congress Party. Now, like I said, we can divide this history into 5 or 6 phases. We'll quickly look at what those phases are. So, this is the first phase, founding by AO Hume.
The founding phase. Yeah.
The second is the leadership, is how the leadership of the Congress Party passed into the hands of Indians from the British, from AO Hume. Okay, and out there, the third phase begins with the rise of Lokamanya Balagangadhar Tilak. The fourth phase begins with the arrival and the usurpation, the complete monopolization of leadership by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. The fourth phase is the rise and a similar usurpation of political power and the Congress organization after India attained independence by Nawab Nehru. The fourth phase, this is the fifth phase.
Fifth phase now.
Fifth phase is Indira Gandhi. The sixth phase is Rajiv Gandhi. The seventh phase is Sonia Gandhi. Okay. This is pretty much how we can divide.
So 7 phases.
7 phases. Okay. Now, before we'll get to the second phase in the next episode. Okay. Now, what happened even during the first phase is that AO Hume co-opted several Indians. Remember the fact that who was his target audience? It was the Macaulay educated, English educated Bengali elite. So for the longest time, even until until the partition of Bengal, the Congress Party was dubbed by the Imperial British government as non-entities, as a minuscule minority, which was true. No matter who the stalwarts who headed the Congress Party after it was taken over by Indians from AO Hume, no matter their eminences, the British did not care. Their influence, the leadership of the Congress Party helmed by Indians, their influence was minuscule. It was limited. It was not pan-Indian at all.
Not at all.
Okay, what should also not be forgotten is that the India until 1947, there were 2 Indias. The first was known as British India, meaning all those territories in India which were directly controlled by the Crown of England. That part was known as British India. The other part were known as princely states, which was about 550 or 565 or 562. Okay, so you had 2 distinct Indias, which the British had very, very, cleverly designed. This kind of, administration is an anomaly which, in the words of D.V. Gundappa, which baffled the best minds in international law. This kind of classificatory scheme, having multiple countries within the same allegedly unified British controlled India. All right. So, in such a situation, how do you call the Congress Party, the Indian National Congress? Remember, it was not a party. It was Indian National Congress, popularly known, widely known simply known as Congress. So, how do you call this? And, as a pan-Indian organization in the initial stages, it was not. It had negligible influence in the princely states, in the early stages. So when Rahul Gandhi, when Rajiv Gandhi, all these dynasts, when they talk about the great Congress party, celebrate its centenary, pat themselves on the back as a party that got India independence, which Congress are they talking about?
Absolutely, it's factually incorrect. The claim has been perpetuated too long.
Correct. So this is where, like I said, you have to examine this issue from this kind of civilizational standpoint.
True, and the epochs you set the context with,
Yeah.
and the phases of Congress clearly established that.
Right. So I think we can close this episode at this point, because there'll be a lot of overlaps, and if we begin phase 2 at this stage. So I think we
Fair.
can
So
conclude.
before we close, so you're saying in the next episode we shall get into how the power passed on into the hands of
Indians.
so to speak, right? So great, Sandeep. So good to set this context on the founding context of the Congress. And for the longest time, we all believed that it was never a party. It was. Now that you explained the genesis, so looking forward to the remaining parts of how all the 7 phases that we outlined on the Congress Party. So this promises, to my mind, to be as enlightening as the series on history that we did with Sandeep. And in the first episode that we just concluded, Sandeep put the founding context of the Congress Party, which later on it called a party. It was actually a planted regent by the British Empire. That's how I would put it, to control another uprising, which to my mind would be a revelation to some of you. So in the next episode, which is the second episode of the series, we shall be talking to Sandeep on how the transition of power happened into the hands of Indians, the emergence of Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and eventually leading to Surendranath, and then how Gandhi emerged on the scene. So that shall be the focus of our next episode. So thank you for your patronage and viewing. Keep watching Dharma Conversations. Do like, share and subscribe to Dharma Conversations. And we're looking at all of you participating in this journey as Sandeep unravels the history of the Congress Party as we know it today. So please like, share, subscribe and give us a super thanks.